The bell rang and I opened the door to a yard full of color. Balloons bobbed. A big for sale sign leaned on my front lawn like a stranger. People in bright clothes milled on my porch. I blinked. The realtor smiled too wide and held out a clipboard. "You must be Mrs. Sloan. We're so glad you could welcome buyers," she chirped. My legs felt hollow. I live here," I said, voice small. From the kitchen came clinking glass. My son Evan stepped out with a champagne bottle, popping it with careless pride. "Surprise, Mom," he called. "We're finally selling this place like we talked about." I looked at the sign that had never been there that morning. Panic pinched my stomach. "Evan?" I asked. He waved a stack of papers like a fan. "You signed the transfer, remember?" For a moment the crowd hushed, like a room holding its breath. I had to steady my hands on the doorframe. My throat felt tight. "I never signed anything," I said. He laughed, a thin sound. Guests began to walk in, oohing at my curtains, complimenting the hardwood floors. Someone said, "What a charming house." I tasted metal like fear. I thought of the many nights I had fixed leaky taps and painted the nursery. This house was my life. I had taught children here. I had planted the maple in the yard. I thought of my husband's hand on mine when we closed the loan years ago. Now strangers walked through my rooms like strangers in my head. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are now. A woman looked at Evan and smiled, trusting. I did not. Evan was a different man in that moment. Slick hair, easy smile, a suit that smelled of new money. He moved like the room belonged to him already. "Mom, this is for your good," he said, as if he knew the shape of what I needed better than I did. The realtor set out glossy flyers and asked if I wanted a lemonade. I wanted to take the flyers and tear them into confetti. I wanted to shout that the oak tree out back was planted by my husband and me when we had saved the deposit. Instead I found myself smiling because my hands would not stop trembling. A woman with a clipboard asked me to show a guest the sunroom. I led them, numb, watching as a man in a blue jacket ran his hand on the window frame like he owned my memories. Evan stood in the doorway and handed a champagne glass to a buyer. "This is our open house," he announced. People applauded politely. My neighbor Mrs. Klein leaned in and whispered, "I thought you put it up?" Her voice had worry sewn into it. I shook my head. The thought burned in me. Who signed? Who believed it was okay to sell my house without my say? I had lost my husband a few years before and had trusted Evan to help me with paperwork. He had promised. Seeing him play host made a cold ache climb my spine. The realtor gave me a pamphlet and said, "You look like you have questions. I'll be right over there." Her hand tapped the agent badge like a bandage. I clutched the pamphlet like it would anchor me. Inside my head, a small voice said, "Find proof. Find out who did this." I remembered the week before as if it had been a film I'd watched too many times. Evan had come by and asked me to sign delivery papers for a few boxes. He said the movers would pick things up and store them until I decided what to keep. I had trusted him, scribbled my name. Later that night I sat with a cup of tea and felt a slow worry. The signature had felt too quick when I did it. His ease around forms now looked different. I found myself going through a small pile of bills and letters and noticed a gap. A letter from the county recorder that I had expected had not come. I asked Evan about it and he said, "Oh, probably lost in the mail, Mom." He smiled, the same ease like a mask. That day I had gone to the neighbor's house and asked quietly if they had seen anyone new. Mrs. Klein told me she had seen a photographer on my lawn in the morning. "They take pictures for listings," she said. I sat back down as the house hummed around me. The thought that someone had used my name and my signature to push papers through felt like a frost. I had taught children how to read and write. I could tell a forged signature when I saw one. My hands had been steady when I signed for deliveries. But now I knew to look closely. The next morning I walked to City Hall with a paper list in my pocket and a feeling in my gut that had teeth. They told me to wait. The clerk said he would check records. I watched the slow spinning fan and realized I would have to be patient and sharp. This was no longer just headache or worry. It was theft in thin clothes. Back at home during the open house, I found the kitchen full of people chewing appetizers like the house was already rented in their minds. My mouth tasted of lemon and fear. I retreated to the bedroom and closed the door with hands that shook less now because the shaking had turned into a plan. I rummaged in the old cedar chest where my husband kept his papers. Dust rose in the beam of light from the window. In the very bottom, under a stack of yellowed receipts, I found the property deed. My name was on it, clear and firm. Not a smudge. Not a forgery. The notary's stamp was crisp. The paper felt like a promise that had not been broken. My heart thudded. Proof burned my hands in a way that felt like warmth. If they had a forged signature, this deed would show the truth. I took pictures of the deed on my old phone, careful of glare and angle. I did not want to hand it to Evan. Not yet. I wanted the moment to be mine. I had been a teacher for decades. I knew how to plan a lesson and watch the students surprise you with what they learned. This was my lesson now. I tucked the pictures into my sleeve and walked back downstairs, pulling my shoulders back like I was wearing armor. The crowd moved through my dining room, laughing about the color of the paint. I smiled at them and kept my hands folded. I would not let them rush me. They had started a story about my house without me. I would finish it. I sat back down at the dining table where Evan had been holding court, and I felt something settle in my chest. My hands did not shake now. I listened to a man ask about the roof and I answered with its age and last repair. Details Evan had never known but my husband and I had lived through. The realtor gave a practiced smile and asked if I might share any memories of the house. I told a short story about the maple tree and how my son had climbed it with scraped knees when he was small. The room softened for a moment at the memory. Evan's smile thinned. He leaned across to the realtor and whispered something. The realtor looked surprised and then uneasy. I felt the shift like a small wind under a door. People started to slow down, eyes moving from Evan to me and back. I had placed the deed pictures on my phone and kept my fingers near it. I had already called a number at the county fraud unit earlier that morning from the library terminal. They said they would send an officer if there was a report. I had not wanted a scene, but I had prepared for one. I would not allow my son to sell my life for a headline. As the party flowed, I greeted a woman who said she had loved the stove and then I saw the sheriff car turn onto my street. My breath hitched. A small sound ran through the room, like the first note of a song you recognize. I smiled wider, and inside, I held my breath for the next move. Evan noticed the faint flash of lights outside before anyone else did. "Oh great, the neighbors called about parking again," he said, brushing it off. I sipped my water to hide the tremor in my fingers. The doorbell rang a second time, crisp and official. I stood. "I'll get it," I said. Evan's hand moved toward me, but he stopped when everyone turned to watch. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed deputies stood there, polite smiles on their faces. "Afternoon, ma'am," one said. "We received a report of a possible property dispute at this address." Evan laughed too loud. "That's ridiculous. There's no dispute. My mother's confused." His voice cracked on the word. The deputy's gaze shifted to me. "Are you Mrs. Sloan, owner of the property?" I nodded once. "I have proof." My calm surprised even me. I gestured toward the living room. The crowd parted like curious students. "Come in, officers. Maybe you'll help us settle a small misunderstanding." I walked straight to the table, set down the envelope with my deed copy, and slid it toward the taller deputy. Evan's grin wobbled. "Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at him, really looked, and saw fear hiding under that charm. The deputy unfolded the document, scanned the page, and nodded. "Original notarized deed. Matches county record." Evan's laugh died in his throat. The officer asked him for identification. "Of course," he said, fumbling in his pocket. His hands shook more than mine. Around us, guests stood frozen. The realtor's smile vanished. I could feel the house breathing again. Slow, steady, and on my side. The realtor tried to smooth the tension, her voice high and shaky. "There must be a simple explanation." Mr. Sloan assured us the paperwork was complete. I watched her eyes dart to Evan, then back to the deputies. "May I see the contract?" one officer asked. Evan handed it over with forced calm. His confidence cracked like cheap glass. The officer held the papers up to the light. "Stamp smudged," he murmured. "Notary number doesn't match any record in the system." I could almost hear Evan swallow. I spoke softly, steady as a teacher correcting a lie. "That's because it's forged." The deputy looked at me. "You're certain, ma'am?" I'm the one who signed the real deed years ago, when my husband was alive. The words felt both heavy and freeing. The crowd whispered, phones subtly recording. The agent's face turned pale. Evan tried again. Mom, this isn't how you think it looks. You said you were tired of the upkeep. I met his eyes. Tired of lies, yes. Not my home. The deputy nodded. Sir, I'll need you to step aside while we confirm these documents. Evan turned desperate, a child trapped in a man's suit. You can't do this in front of everyone, he hissed. I leaned in, my voice a whisper only he could hear. You did. He blinked, stunned. The deputies moved closer. Please come with us, sir, one said. We'll clear this up downtown. Evan froze, eyes darting toward the open door where neighbors now gathered to watch. The party had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning wrapped in polite smiles. As the deputies led him toward the porch, Evan's voice rose, cracking under the weight of his panic. You can't just take me. This is my mother. She's not well. His words clawed the air, desperate for sympathy. The younger officer paused at the threshold. Sir, calm down. We'll review everything at the station. The crowd had gone silent. Even the realtor didn't move. She stood clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. I followed them to the doorway, the autumn light sharp and golden. Officer, I said quietly, check the email I sent earlier. The subject line says, real estate fraud in progress. He nodded. Got it this morning, ma'am. That's why we're here. My chest filled with something that felt dangerously close to relief. Evan twisted to look at me. You planned this. His voice cracked again, half disbelief, half betrayal. You plan to humiliate me? I looked at him without anger. I plan to protect what your father and I built. The officer opened the car door. Evan's charm had drained away. You'll regret this, he said through gritted teeth. Maybe, I answered softly, but I'll do it from my own front porch. The door shut, sealing the sound. The street was full of curious faces, cameras raised. I didn't care. Inside, the guests shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to leave or applaud. I closed the door slowly, feeling the weight of years settle differently. Lighter this time, balanced on truth. When I turned back to the room, the realtor's cheeks had gone the color of ash. Mrs. Sloan, she began, I swear I had no idea. He gave me every document, every proof of ownership. I'd never have. I held up a hand. You were misled. I understand. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. He said you'd moved in with your sister. I should have checked. We all should have, I said. I walked to the window, watching the patrol car's lights fade down the street. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply. The house smelled like candles, polish, and roasted appetizers. A strange scent of victory. Guests began to murmur thanks and slip out, some embarrassed, some sympathetic. A woman near the door whispered, Good for you standing up to him. I nodded faintly. My body trembled, not from fear this time but from release. The realtor gathered her papers, hands shaking. If you ever want to sell for real, call me, she said weakly. But I'll check the ID twice next time. I almost smiled. When the door finally closed and silence fell, I sank onto the couch. My phone buzzed, voicemail from the county fraud office. Ma'am, we'll need your statement. This was the right thing to do. I stared at the maple outside, its leaves bright red, as if it knew. My late husband once said, the roots keep us steady, Maggie. Don't ever let anyone dig them up. I hadn't. Not today. That night I couldn't sleep. The house groaned softly as it always had, pipes clicking, wood settling, like it was breathing beside me. I wandered the hall, touching walls that had held every birthday and every storm. In the kitchen, half-empty glasses and crumbs still told the story of what had happened. I poured myself tea and sat at the table, the same one where my son had once done his homework. The same boy who now sat in a police station answering questions about forged signatures. I felt grief more than anger. Grief for what love turns into when greed takes its place. But underneath it all, a plan continued to form. The deputies would investigate, yes, but I wanted to make sure the truth couldn't be buried or twisted. I opened my laptop, saved copies of every message, every email, every photo I'd taken. I created a folder named Evidence. Then another named Lessons. In that one, I began to write. Every event, every mistake, every clue I'd missed. Not for revenge. For record. For understanding. Outside, the porch light flickered. I stood and turned it off. I whispered to the house. We're safe now. But we're not done yet. Because somewhere inside me, I knew Evan wasn't finished either. He'd always been clever. And clever people don't surrender easily. The next morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I woke feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I brewed coffee and stood by the kitchen window. The yard looked ordinary again, but I knew everything had changed. I checked my email. The sheriff's office had already sent a case number. The investigation had officially begun. Yet, I also knew Evan. He would twist the truth, blame me, maybe even say I was losing my mind. That was his favorite trick. Make others doubt what they saw. So, I decided to stay ahead. I called the bank, the title office, and even the utilities to confirm every account was still under my name. Each "yes, ma'am" felt like a stone placed firmly under my feet. Around noon, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Klein from next door. "He came by last night," she whispered. "Your son." He looked furious. "Said you overreacted." I thanked her, hung up, and stared out at the street. I could almost hear his voice. Calm, reasonable, dripping with guilt. He'd probably tell anyone who'd listen that I was confused, that grief had made me unstable. I knew what he'd do because he'd done it before. Small lies disguised as concern. I took out my notebook and wrote at the top of a clean page. "He thinks I'm weak. Let him." I underlined it twice. Then I smiled and whispered, "I'll show him what weak looks like when it wins." By afternoon, I'd put the house back together, cleaning every glass and plate left from the chaos. Each scrub of the sponge felt like reclaiming something. When the doorbell rang again, I nearly froze. But it wasn't police or strangers this time. It was the realtor, holding flowers and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Sloan," she said softly, "I just wanted to apologize in person. I should have checked everything." I invited her in. "You didn't forge the papers," I said. "He did." She nodded, twisting the edge of her jacket. "The department's reviewing my license, but, honestly, you saved me from worse trouble." Her words carried weight. "If you ever need help," she added, "I'll testify." I handed her tea, grateful but still guarded. "Tell me," I asked, "did Evan mention where he got the notary?" She frowned, thinking. "He said it was handled by someone named J. Keller. Out of Phoenix." I wrote it down. Every clue mattered now. Before leaving, she turned at the door. "You were so calm yesterday," she said. "How did you do it?" I smiled faintly. "I've been a teacher for 30 years. When you deal with liars, you learn to let them think they're winning until they're not." She laughed softly, and for the first time since the chaos began, the sound didn't feel foreign in my home. When the door closed behind her, I looked again at the note. J. Keller. That name would be my next lesson plan. I drove to the county recorder's office again the next morning. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, recognized me. "Back so soon, Mrs. Sloan?" he asked. "Still a mess, I'm afraid," I said. "I need to check for any filings under the name Keller." He typed quickly, scanning the screen. Looks like 3 notary entries tied to your address, all within the last month. 2 rejected for mismatched IDs. My breath caught. And the 3rd. He frowned. "Pending verification. It lists an electronic signature from..." He hesitated. "From your son." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Can you print that?" "I can't give you the document, but I can give you the file number." He scribbled it on a sticky note and slid it across the counter. "You should talk to the sheriff's fraud division. They're already tracking that notary." I thanked him, clutching the note like a lifeline. Outside, the desert sun was sharp, the sky endless blue. I stood by my car, breathing slowly. Each clue I found was another thread tied around Evan's lies. He thought this would be easy. His aging mother, too trusting, too kind. But I'd spent years catching cheating students who thought I wouldn't notice a copied essay. Cheaters always underestimate the quiet ones. I smiled to myself, started the car, and said aloud, "Lesson number 2. Never test a teacher who's grading your future. That night, I sat at the dining table with my old laptop and opened a new email draft. The address bar read, Evan Sloan. My fingers hovered above the keys before typing. Dear Evan, I hope you're safe. I know things got out of hand. I'm sure we can still talk. Maybe come by tomorrow. Let's start over. I read it twice, then added a line that would hook him. I've been thinking about the sale. You were right about one thing. Maybe it's time for change. It was bait, gentle and convincing. I hit send, closed the laptop, and leaned back. He'd always believed charm could rewrite truth. He wouldn't resist a chance to gloat. My phone buzzed less than an hour later. His reply was short. Finally. I'll be there at noon. I stared at the screen, imagining his smirk. I whispered, see you then. Before bed, I called Deputy Harris, the one who'd handled the case. If I invite him over, I asked, and he admits to forging documents, can you use it? He hesitated. If you can record it, ma'am, it's strong evidence. I understand, I said, slipping my phone onto the charger. I looked around my house, now spotless, calm, ready. He wanted an open house. I'd give him one, just smaller, quieter, with better witnesses. He arrived the next day dressed too neatly, like he wanted to look innocent. His smile was quick, nervous. You look good, Mom. Rested. I motioned to the kitchen. Coffee. He followed, scanning the room as if expecting police to leap from behind the fridge. I poured him a cup, my own hands steady. I thought we could talk like adults, I said. No police. No shouting. He nodded, easing into the chair. That's all I wanted, Mom. We just misunderstood each other. His words slid like oil, but I let him talk. My phone, face down on the counter, recorded everything. You forged my name, I said softly. His smile faltered. I didn't forge anything. I just signed for you. You hate paperwork. I tilted my head. That's still forgery. He sighed. You'd have thanked me when the house sold. You don't need this big place. My voice lowered. So you decided to take it? He leaned forward, frustrated. You don't get it. I earned it. I took care of you after Dad died. I deserve something. His anger flared, quick and sharp. I stayed still, watching the mask fall. And you deserve prison for it, I said. He blinked, realizing too late. The kitchen door opened. Deputy Harris stepped in with another officer. Evan froze mid-breath. What? How? Harris held up his phone. She called before you arrived. The cuffs clicked, final and clean. Evan's face went white. I whispered, Lesson 3. Never test your teacher during a pop quiz. After they took Evan away, the house felt too still, as if it was listening for what came next. Deputy Harris lingered by the doorway. We'll hold him for questioning, ma'am. The recording you made, it's solid. He admitted to signing your name. His tone softened. You did well. I nodded, my throat tight. I just want my house back, I whispered. He tipped his hat and left, the sound of the cruiser fading down the street. I sat alone in the kitchen, the coffee gone cold, my hands around the mug like it might still warm me. For a moment, guilt crept in. He was still my son. I remembered the boy who'd once built me a birdhouse with crooked nails and a proud grin. But then I saw the forged signature again in my mind, the champagne in his hand, the strangers walking through my rooms. That boy was gone long before today. I opened my phone and replayed the recording once, just to be sure it was clear. His words, I earned it. Cut like paper. Proof at last. That night, I emailed Deputy Harris a copy, saved another to a USB drive, and tucked it into the jar where I kept sugar packets. My husband used to say, always have a backup. I smiled at that memory, soft and sharp at once. I locked the doors, turned out the lights, and whispered into the dark. One test passed. 9 more to go. The next morning brought sunlight and a quiet I didn't trust. The phone rang early, an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Sloan? A male voice said. This is Detective Arnett, Fraud Division. We're expanding the investigation. May we come by to review documents? Of course, I said, keeping my tone calm though my pulse jumped. 2 officers arrived mid-morning. I laid out the files I'd collected, the deed photos, Evan's emails, and now the full recording. "You did more work than most professionals," Arnett said with a half-smile. "Your son was in contact with a fake notary, J. Keller, who's already under federal investigation." My stomach turned. So Evan was part of a ring? Possibly. We're still tracing payments. "You've done the right thing." When they left, I stood by the window watching them drive off, sunlight flashing on their car roof. I should have felt safer, but I didn't. There was still too much of Evan in the walls. His voice, his laughter, his plans. Around noon, Mrs. Klein stopped by with muffins and a worried face. "He'll twist the story," she warned. "Say you set him up." I sighed. "Then I'll show the truth." She looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to pity or admire me. When she left, I sat at my desk and wrote in my notebook again. If he's my test, then I'm his lesson. A week passed before I heard news. The sheriff's office called to say Evan had made bail. "He's under investigation, not conviction," Harris explained carefully. "We've warned him to stay away." I thanked him, hung up, and immediately checked every lock twice. Fear was back, quiet and familiar, like an old ache. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the fridge. Around midnight, I saw headlights pause outside, too long, then roll away. My heart pounded. I picked up my phone and messaged Harris. "He's out. If anything happens, come fast." He replied within a minute. "We'll keep a patrol nearby." Still, I slept lightly, dreams full of footsteps. The next morning, a small envelope lay on my porch. No stamp. Just my name scrawled across it in Evan's handwriting. Inside was a single photo, him as a child, maybe 7, holding the birdhouse he'd made, smiling with missing teeth. On the back he'd written, "You took everything from me. Now I'll take it back." My breath caught. It wasn't a threat to my body. It was a threat to my peace. I slipped the photo into a folder marked evidence. Then I poured fresh coffee and whispered, "You'll never take this house again. You already lost the only part that mattered." The following days became a careful rhythm. Lock doors. Record everything. Stay alert. I bought a small camera and fixed it above the porch light. Every night I checked its feed, half expecting to see him. One evening, just after sunset, I did. Evan stood at the edge of the yard, half in shadow, staring at the house. I watched from the dark living room, phone ready. He didn't move closer. He just looked long and hard, as if trying to memorize the windows. Then he turned and walked away. I sent the footage to Detective Arnett that same night. He called within minutes. "We'll issue a restraining order first thing tomorrow," he said. "You've got courage, Mrs. Sloan." "I just have something worth keeping," I replied. When dawn came, I stood outside for the first time in days. The yard was damp with dew, quiet except for a dove calling somewhere in the maple. I thought of my husband again. He'd always said I was tougher than I looked. I brushed dust from the for sale sign still lying by the shed and leaned it against the trash bin. "Lesson 4, I murmured. "Clean up the mess they leave behind." 2 weeks later, I was called to the courthouse to give my statement under oath. I wore my best navy dress, the one I used to wear to parent-teacher nights. When I arrived, Evan was already there, flanked by his lawyer, a slick man in a gray suit who smiled too much. Evan didn't look at me. The judge asked basic questions first, voice steady and formal. Then the lawyer started pressing. "Mrs. Sloan, do you suffer from memory lapses? Any confusion about legal paperwork?" I met his gaze evenly. "Only when someone forges my name on it." A small laugh rippled through the courtroom. The judge's brow lifted slightly. The lawyer tried again. "You're saying your own son acted without consent?" "I'm saying my son sold his integrity cheaper than this house," I replied. Evan finally looked up, red-faced. The judge called for quiet. After my testimony, the detective played the recording, Evan's voice admitting everything. His lawyer's smile faltered. When it ended, the judge said simply, "That will do for today." I stood to leave, passing Evan as I went. He whispered, "You think this is over?" I looked at him, calm and certain. "It is for you." Outside, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. A young woman asked, "Mrs. Sloan, how did you plan it?" I smiled faintly. Teachers learn early. When someone cheats, you make sure the whole class knows. The trial date was set for late September. Until then, I was told to keep a low profile. But small towns don't stay quiet, especially when scandal smells like newsprint. Every grocery line, every coffee shop whispered my name. Some praised me. Others pitied me. I walked through it all steady, chin high, like I used to face a classroom of restless 8th graders. Deputy Harris stopped by often, sometimes just to check locks, sometimes to talk. "You're a rare one, Mrs. Sloan," he said one evening. "Most folks crumble when family turns." I smiled faintly. Teachers don't crumble. We adjust the lesson plan. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket, watching the streetlights flicker on. My maple tree rustled softly. I could almost hear my husband's laugh in the wind. I missed the quiet we used to share. Inside, I kept my evidence folder on the table, open, ready. The photo Evan had sent, the child he once was, stared up at me. For a moment, I touched it gently, then closed the folder. I told myself he made his choices. I just graded them. Still, the ache in my chest wouldn't leave. Justice was right. But it wasn't easy. Around midnight, I finally rose, locked the door, and whispered, "Lesson 5. Some tests hurt the teacher more than the student." Weeks blurred into careful routines. Each day I marked off the calendar, one square at a time. Then, one morning, a knock shattered the calm. I opened the door to find the realtor again. Softer now, guilt still in her eyes. "Mrs. Sloan, you should see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a local news headline. "Son of retired teacher claims false arrest." My stomach tightened. Evan had spoken to the press. I scrolled through the article. He said I'd grown confused after my husband's death, that he'd tried to protect family assets. Lies polished to sound like love. "He's playing sympathy," the realtor said quietly. "Public image before trial." I nodded slowly. He always liked an audience. I sat at the kitchen table after she left, reading the story again. His words stung because they were carefully close to truth. Yes, I'd been grieving, yes, he'd helped with paperwork, but he'd twisted it until pity replaced guilt. That was his real skill. I opened my notebook, wrote, "Lesson 6, Liars survive on silence." I picked up the phone, called the same reporter listed in the article, and said calmly, "I'd like to tell my side. On record." Her surprise was clear. "You're ready to go public?" "No," I said. "I'm ready to teach." The reporter came 2 days later. A young woman named Kendra, sharp-eyed and polite. I offered her tea, though my hands shook slightly as I poured. "You don't have to talk if it's too painful," she said. "Painful's fine," I answered. "Untrue isn't." I showed her the photos, the deed, even the forged forms. Then I played the recording. She listened without interrupting, only nodding. When it ended, she looked at me for a long time. "He really said that?" "He really did." She exhaled. "I'll print both sides, but this changes things." When the article ran 3 days later, the headline hit differently. "Mother outsmarts son in real estate fraud attempt." My phone buzzed all day with calls from neighbors, former students, even strangers thanking me for speaking up. The comments online flooded with words like brave and inspiring. But the one that made me pause came from a woman named Clara. "You just gave my mom the courage to stand up to my brother." I sat back, tears in my eyes. For years, I taught lessons about honesty and courage. Now, unknowingly, I'd taught one more. That night, I placed the paper on the mantel beside my husband's photo. "We did all right, didn't we?" I whispered. The house seemed to hum in quiet agreement. The story spread fast. Reporters came knocking, some from as far as Phoenix. One afternoon, a local TV crew parked outside, camera lights bouncing off my windows. I agreed to one interview. Just one. The reporter asked me how I'd managed to keep calm through betrayal. I looked into the lens and said, "I've taught hundreds of children who thought lying would save them. The truth always catches up, even if it walks slower." Afterward, neighbors came with casseroles and smiles. Awkward but kind. Mrs. Klein said, "You've turned into a celebrity." I laughed softly. I'd rather be anonymous, but I'll take justice. Later that night, I watched the broadcast replay. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. They showed footage of the house, the maple tree glowing under dusk light, and ended with my words, "Never let anyone sell what you've already paid for in love." Seeing it on screen made something settle deep inside me. I'd reclaimed not only the house but the story itself. And when Evan's lawyer called the next morning demanding I stop talking to the press, I told him calmly. He opened the door. I just turned on the light. The line went dead. Lesson 7, Truth, once spoken, can't be repossessed. September's trial came with bright skies and sharp nerves. The courtroom was cool, the air humming with quiet tension. Evan sat at the defense table, head lowered, his lawyer flipping through folders. I sat behind the prosecution, clutching a small charm bracelet my husband once gave me. The judge entered, gavel sharp. Testimony began. The detective spoke first, laying out evidence, the forged notary, the emails, the recording. Then came the realtor, trembling but firm. He told me his mother was moving to a nursing home. He lied. Finally it was my turn. I walked to the stand, swore the oath, and looked at my son. His eyes flicked up for just a second. Anger, then shame. "Mrs. Sloan," the prosecutor said, "what does this house mean to you?" My throat tightened. "It's more than walls. It's where I taught my students after school, where my husband built shelves, where my son learned to read." I paused. "And where I learned that love without respect isn't love at all." The courtroom stayed silent. When I stepped down, I felt lighter than I had in years. That night, waiting for the verdict, I wrote in my notebook one last line. Lesson 8. Sometimes justice isn't about winning, it's about finishing the lesson. The verdict came the next afternoon. The courtroom felt too small for all the air being held inside it. Evan's lawyer made one last plea for leniency. Family misunderstanding, he called it. But the judge had already seen the footage, heard the confession, read the forged signatures. She adjusted her glasses, eyes steady on my son. "Mr. Sloan, this court finds you guilty of attempted real estate fraud, forgery, and falsifying legal documents." Her voice was calm, final. Evan blinked fast, disbelief fighting reason. "Sentencing will include 8 years without parole consideration for the first 3. The gavel struck once. The sound echoed through me like a release. Evan turned toward me as officers took him by the arm. "Mom," he whispered, "you didn't have to destroy me." I held his gaze, the ache deep but steady. "I didn't," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." He flinched, looked away. When they let him out, I sat for a long moment, letting the noise fade. My lawyer, Mr. Lowell, touched my shoulder. "You did the hardest thing, Mrs. Sloan." I nodded. "No," I said softly. "The hardest thing was loving him enough to let justice finish the job." Outside, the sunlight was warm. I breathed deep and finally felt the ground hold me again. Lesson 9. Justice might break your heart, but it keeps your soul standing. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. The envelope bore the prison's return address. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside, in Evan's tight handwriting, were only a few sentences. "I thought you'd give me everything. I thought love meant that. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I had to say it." My eyes blurred as I read it twice. The pain wasn't clean, it was layered, anger, sorrow, love all tangled together. I set the letter on the table and poured tea, letting the words settle. Forgiveness wasn't something I could summon on command. It would come slow if at all. Still, I didn't burn the letter. I placed it in the folder marked evidence, though this one felt different. It wasn't proof of crime. It was proof of consequence. That night, I walked through the house barefoot. The floors creaked like familiar voices. Every step reminded me what I'd fought for. I stopped by the window where the for sale sign had once stood. The grass had grown back there, green and soft. The space looked healed. Maybe someday we both would be. I whispered into the quiet. Lesson 10. Truth hurts slower but it heals cleaner. The weeks that followed were strange. Silence filled corners once crowded by tension. I kept busy, painting walls, polishing wood, donating Evan's things to charity. Each small act was a stitch, mending the torn fabric of my days. One morning, a letter came from the county. They'd officially closed the case. The words property restored in full looked plain on paper, but they felt like music. I framed that notice and hung it near the door. Visitors came, Mrs. Klein with cookies, the realtor with cautious smiles, and even Deputy Harris checking in. "House suits you again," he said. "Feels alive." I nodded. "It's mine again," I replied, smiling. That weekend, I did something bold. I hosted an open house, not for sale, but for the neighborhood. I called it a lesson in home. Flyers went up around town. "Come share stories, learn about senior fraud prevention." The day came bright and warm. People filled my yard, laughing, sharing coffee. I looked around and thought, this is what open should feel like. A little girl tugged my sleeve and said, "My grandma says you're a hero." I knelt down and smiled. "Tell her I'm just a teacher. Heroes do homework too." The open house drew more attention than I'd expected. The sheriff himself came, off duty, smiling wide. "You started something good, Mrs. Sloan," he said. "People are talking about protecting their rights, about checking documents. You're changing things." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "All I did was pay attention," I said. "That's what teachers do." Reporters snapped photos of the event, the old chalkboard I'd set up with simple words written in white. Lesson 11, Know Your Worth. I stood by that board, answering questions, sharing coffee, laughing freely. My home had turned from crime scene to classroom, from betrayal to lesson. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, I carried the last folding chair inside. The house was quiet again, but the quiet felt different now, earned. I sat by the window, watching the maple sway. A breeze carried children's laughter from down the block. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I felt wise. Lesson 12, If life takes your trust, build wisdom in its place. By October, the news had faded from headlines, but one story lingered online. Local woman outsmarts family fraud, turns pain into purpose. The photo showed me smiling beside my maple tree, leaves gold around me. I'd never thought I'd be the kind of woman in a headline, but here I was. Proof that even small voices could echo. That day, a white van parked on my street. I thought it was another delivery until a young journalist stepped out, camera in hand. "Mrs. Sloan," she asked. "We're doing a follow-up segment. Could we film your house?" I hesitated, then nodded. When the camera rolled, she asked, "How did it feel, fighting your own son?" I took a long breath. "Like standing in a storm," I said. But I remembered something my husband used to tell me. Storms pass, but the house must stand. The crew packed up after, thanking me for my courage. As they left, I walked to the edge of my lawn. The grass under my feet was cool, alive. The maple swayed above, steady as ever. I reached down, pulled the last splinter of the old for sale sign from the dirt, and smiled. "Lesson 13, I whispered. Never let anyone else write your ending." A few days later, I received an email from the local college. They wanted me to speak at a seminar about fraud prevention for seniors. "Just share your story," the organizer wrote. I almost said no. Talking about it still hurt. But then I thought of Clara's comment online, the daughter who said her mom found courage through my story. Maybe one more lesson could help someone else. On the day of the seminar, I wore my best red jacket, the one my husband always said made me look ready for battle. The hall was full. Students, retirees, even police officers. When I stepped to the podium, my hands trembled for just a second, then steadied. "My name is Margaret Sloan," I began, "and my son tried to sell my house." Gasps rippled through the room. "But this isn't a story about loss," I continued. "It's about remembering your own strength." I told them everything, keeping my words simple, clear, honest. When I finished, there was silence, then applause that grew and filled the hall. Afterward, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You just saved my savings." Driving home, I smiled. Lesson 14. Sometimes pain becomes its own textbook. Winter crept in softly. The house smelled of cinnamon and paint. I'd redone the kitchen in soft blue. Each stroke of color felt like rewriting memory. One evening, Deputy Harris stopped by with an envelope. "From the sheriff's office," he said. Inside was a certificate of community recognition. For courage, awareness, and service to others. I laughed, a little embarrassed. I only did what I had to. He grinned. That's what heroes always say. After he left, I placed the certificate beside the framed deed on my wall. 2 pieces of paper. One proved what was mine, the other proved what I'd done. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the street glow under lamplight. Somewhere far away, Evan served his sentence. I wondered if he was learning anything. I hoped so. Justice wasn't revenge. It was a mirror. And I prayed he was brave enough to look into it. Outside, frost touched the maple leaves. I whispered to the empty room, Lesson 15. Sometimes mercy is just letting the truth do its work. Then I turned off the light and slept soundly for the first time in months. January brought a letter from the prison counselor. Your son has entered a financial responsibility program, it read. He's begun restitution payments. I stared at the check enclosed, small but real. Proof that accountability had started. I didn't cash it right away. Placed it in the kitchen drawer, next to my husband's old hammer. He'd always said, fix what's broken, don't throw it away. That night, I baked a pie for no reason other than warmth. The smell filled the house, rich and steady. Later, I carried a slice to Mrs. Klein. You've got color in your cheeks again, she said, smiling. Guess peace looks good on you. I laughed softly. It's a slow recipe. Before bed, I took out my notebook and wrote, Lesson 16. Healing isn't fast, but it's honest. I looked around my home. New paint, clean shelves, light where shadows used to live. I thought about that first day, the crowd in my living room, the forged papers, the humiliation. And now, stillness, ownership, pride. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and whispered to myself, class dismissed. Spring arrived like forgiveness, quiet, patient, unforced. One afternoon, I stood outside trimming the maple tree when a familiar car pulled up. It was the sheriff. Mind if I come in? He asked. Always, I smiled. Inside, he set down a folder. Evan's parole hearing will come next year. They'll ask if you wish to attend. I hesitated. Do I have to? No. But your voice matters. I nodded, unsure. He studied me a moment. You handled everything better than most. We see a lot of people lose themselves to bitterness. I had lesson plans for tougher rooms, I said, and he chuckled. We drank coffee and talked about the community program I'd started, teaching others to recognize scams. Before leaving, he looked at the house one more time. You know, this place stands taller now. I smiled faintly. So do I. After he left, I sat on the porch steps watching dusk settle. Birds returned to the maple, their chatter bright and alive. Lesson 17. Strength doesn't shout. It stands quietly and stays. By summer, the house had become something new. Still mine, but lighter. I'd started tutoring children from the neighborhood again. Their laughter filled the same rooms that once held silence. One afternoon, a boy asked, Miss Maggie, how do you know if someone's lying? I smiled. Because truth feels calm. Lies need noise. He nodded like he understood. When they left, I sat by the window with iced tea and watched the sun streak through the leaves. For the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything. Not apology, not revenge, not closure. I already had all 3 in their truest forms. That evening, I took out my old chalkboard and wrote in white chalk. Lesson 18. The house stood because I did. I left it on the porch for anyone passing by. Mrs. Klein stopped and read it aloud, smiling. You really should write a book. I laughed. Maybe I already did. Just one no one expected. The day faded into a warm, gold quiet, and for once that was enough. Autumn came again, carrying the scent of apples and wood smoke. A full year had passed since the open house. I could still see it sometimes, the flash of balloons, the shock in my chest, the strangers wandering through my memories. But now, that day felt distant, like a story I once read rather than lived. The maple tree burned gold outside, its leaves falling slow and graceful. I opened the windows and let the breeze fill the rooms. The air smelled of freedom. Later, I rearranged the furniture, hung new curtains, and placed fresh flowers where the forged papers once lay. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It was healed. That night, I lit a candle by my husband's photo. We made it, I whispered. The flame flickered like an answer. Lesson 19. Healing doesn't erase scars. It teaches you where they came from. I sat by the window until midnight, the house around me quiet, solid, safe. Every creak, every shadow felt familiar again. Not threats, but proof of life. I had survived, rebuilt, and reclaimed everything that mattered. And tomorrow, I decided, I'd celebrate properly, with an open house of my own. I called it the Real Open House. Flyers went up around town. 1 year later, community gathering, music, pie, and stories. The response stunned me. Neighbors, friends, former students, even the realtor came. People brought dishes, laughter, and light. I wore a green dress and an apron dusted with flour, greeting everyone at the door like family. "Welcome to my home," I said again and again, and this time every word was true. The sheriff dropped by, smiling as he handed me a donation envelope. "Fraud Prevention Fund," he said. "You started something bigger than you think." Children played tag in the yard under the maple, and someone strummed guitar. The house glowed with laughter instead of lies. As I passed a mirror in the hallway, I caught my reflection. Older, wiser, but peaceful. Lesson 20. Freedom feels like sunlight through clean windows. When the last guests left, I stood on the porch, breathing the night air, the sound of crickets and distant music wrapping around me. My heart felt light, steady, alive. This was how the story should end. Not in courtrooms or anger, but in warmth and open doors. The sheriff returned a week later, this time without uniform. "Just visiting," he said, holding 2 coffees. We sat on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. He told me how cases like mine had changed how the county handled elder fraud. Quicker action, easier reporting. "You turned your pain into policy," he said. I smiled faintly. Guess old teachers never stop making lessons. He looked out at the yard, leaves spinning down. "You handled it better than most. No revenge, no bitterness." I shrugged. Revenge is noisy. Peace is quiet, and it lasts longer. He raised his cup. To quiet victories. We drank, watching kids ride bikes down the street. After he left, I went inside, the afternoon light slanting gold across the floor. On the wall, the framed deed and certificate gleamed side by side. Proof of ownership and endurance. Lesson 21. True justice leaves room for peace. I stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of everything lighter somehow. The house hummed around me, alive and waiting for the next chapter. One I'd get to write myself. A month later, I finally did something symbolic. Out on the lawn, the old for sale sign still leaned half-buried near the hedge, warped from rain and time. I pulled it free from the dirt, the wood splintering in my hands. For a moment, I stared at it, the same sign that once announced my loss. Then I snapped it in two. The crack echoed across the yard, sharp and final. I carried the pieces to the trash bin, dusted my hands, and felt a calm settle deep inside me. No one could ever sell this home again. Not in paperwork, not in deceit, not in fear. Mrs. Klein waved from across the street. "Looks like you're finally done with that chapter," she called. "Completely," I said, smiling. Back inside, I brewed tea and opened my notebook. On the last blank page, I wrote, Lesson 22. Some endings aren't sad, they're clean. The words looked right, strong, true. I closed the notebook, set it on the mantel and whispered, "Class truly dismissed." Thanksgiving arrived again. The same day it all began. But this time, there were no forged papers, no crowds of strangers. Just friends gathered around my table. Rosalind from the paper, Deputy Harris, the sheriff, Mrs. Klein, and a few neighbors who had become family. Laughter filled the house like sunlight. We ate, talked, and toasted to lessons learned. After dessert, someone asked, "Maggie, if you could sum up this year in one line, what would it be?" I looked around my reclaimed home, the glowing walls, the quiet maple beyond the window, the warmth of safety, and smiled. "He thought he could sell my house," I said softly. "He forgot who built it." The table went still, then applause and laughter filled the room. I raised my glass. To homes worth fighting for. The clink of glasses, the hum of voices, the comfort of belonging, all of it wrapped around me like a promise. Lesson 23. The strongest foundations are built on truth. As the candles flickered low, I leaned back, content. The house stood steady. And so did I. Please subscribe to this channel and leave your comments below. Thanks.